My name is Honoria Vane, and they carried my husband's campaign trunk out into the rain and set it down in the mud of the drive. 31 years I had been mistress of Hollowmere. The trunk had crossed 3 seas with the Colonel. Now it sat in a puddle on my own gravel, the brass corners going dark with wet. I did not weep. I only bent and lifted the near corner out of the water, the way you lift a child's chin. That was my cousin by marriage's welcome to me, 3 weeks a widow. Later he stood before 22 of my own tenants and family and said it plain. A colonel's widow signs where she is told, "Cousin, the will is plain." 22 people heard him. Not one of them looked at me. So that night I climbed to the attic, to a japanned box my husband had made me swear I would never open. Never, unless a Vane tried to take Hollowmere. If you have ever been treated as invisible by your own family, this story is for you. Before I go on, let me ask one small thing. If a story about a woman the world tried to erase is the kind you want to hear to the end, subscribe and stay with me. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I like to know who is sitting with me while I speak. There, that is done. Now come back to Somerset with me, to the year 1883, and I will tell you all of it, from the beginning, the way it happened. Hollowmere sits in a fold of ground above the village of Nethercleave, 400 acres, and the best of them are the water meadows down along the brook. My Rupert loved that low green ground more than any parade square he ever stood on. He was a soldier 30 years. Fever took him in the end, not a bullet, a fever he brought back from a hot country the second to last time the flag called him out. He came home grey and thin, and he never quite came right again, but he loved that ground. I want you to understand what those years were, before the grasping began, or none of the rest will land as it should. 31 years married. I was 23 when I came to Hollowmere as a bride, and I did not know one end of a plough from the other. Rupert was away more than he was home. So I learned. I learned the price of hay in a wet year and the price of it in a dry one. I learned which tenant was slow because he was idle and which was slow because his wife was dying and he could not say so. I sat up with sick beasts. I sat up with sick men. 2 harvests came in ruined while the Colonel was overseas, and it was I who went to the bank at Cranley, and I who kept the roof on every cottage on the estate through both of them. There was a year the brook rose and took half the water meadows under. The men said, "Let it lie, buy the hay in." I said no. I had them out in the wet cutting a new channel by lantern, and I stood in the mud to my boot tops with them, and we saved the meadows. When Rupert came home on his leave and walked that green ground, he took off his hat to me, in front of the men. He said, "Honno, I have held ground under fire that I was prouder of, but not much prouder. I have kept that sentence 30 years. I keep it still. I never took my widow's portion of his pension while he lived, though it was owed. I let it lie with the Crown, told them to keep the account. We did not need it. There were tenants who needed it more. There was a family in the gatehouse, the Pools, 3 children and a 4th coming, and the man had hurt his back at the haying. Any other mistress would have turned them out for a stronger hand. I carried them 2 winters. That is not to make myself a saint. I am telling you so that you will know the ground I stood on when the trouble came. I had earned my place at Hollowmere with my own 2 hands over 31 years, and there was not a soul in Nethercleave who did not know it. The last thing my husband said to me that I count as words, and not just fever talk, he said with his hand on my wrist. The ground I mean to be buried in, Honno, not a churchyard in a strange county. Here, my own ground. I promised him. We buried him on the rise above the meadows, where he could see the low green land, if the Dead Sea. The rector, old Amos Pike, read the words over him, and half the village stood in the wind with their hats off. That was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday, because the market was on, and the men came straight from it, still with the smell of the pens on them, to see the Colonel down. 3 weeks. That was all the peace I was allowed. In those 3 weeks I did what a widow does. I went through his things. It is a slow, tender business, and I did it slowly because each shirt and each letter was a little more of him I would not touch again. His dispatch case, his medals in their worn leather, a bundle of my own letters to him, kept, I had not known he kept them, tied with a bootlace because he'd had no ribbon in some camp or other. I wept over the bootlace, not over the medals, the bootlace. And up on a high shelf in his dressing room, behind his old field boots, I found the box. It was a small thing, japanned black, the lacquer chipped at one corner, a plain brass hasp. He had made it himself, years back, in one of his home winters when the fever left him restless and he needed his hands busy. I had watched him do the lacquer, coat after coat, in the gun-room. I had thought at the time it was a whim. Now I lifted it down, and it was heavier than I expected, and I remembered. He had put it in my hands one evening, this same box, and he had been unlike himself. "Grave," he said, "Honno, swear me something. This box you never open. Not to see what's in it, not for curiosity, not if I'm dead and you're lonely and you want a piece of me." "Never," I had laughed a little, because he was rarely so solemn. "Never, Rupert?" And he said, "There is one thing that unlocks it. If ever a Vane comes for Hollowmere, comes with paper, comes with a lawyer, comes to put you off this ground, then you open it. Not before. You'll know the day if it comes. I thought it was a soldier's fancy. Men who have made their peace with dying get strange notions. I swore it to quiet him, and I put the box up on the shelf, and I confess I half forgot it. I set it back now, that grieving week behind the boots. I did not open it. No Vane had come for Hollowmere. It was only my husband's sentiment, I thought, some old campaign habit of keeping one thing locked. And beside it on the shelf lay his signet, his brass seal, the Vane device cut into the face of it, that he had pressed into wax on 100 letters home. I took that up and held it. It was cool in my palm, and it fit the hollow of my hand as if it had been cast there. I put the seal in my apron pocket, and I left the box on the shelf. Remember the box, remember the seal. I did not know it then, but I had just held in my 2 hands the whole of what was coming, and I set it down and shut the door. The next morning Crispin came. You should know about Crispin Vane. He was the Colonel's cousin, 41 years old, and where my Rupert had gone into the army. Crispin had gone into an attorney's office and been let go from it, a solicitor's clerk who never made solicitor. Since then he had been what men in the market town politely called a land speculator, which meant he bought a failing farm cheap off a dying man and sold it dear to a company, and did it again, and always seemed to be owed money and owing more. He had come to Rupert's funeral in a black coat too new to have been bought for grief. I had marked that at the time and thought no ill of it. I think of it differently now. He arrived in a hired trap with 2 bags, as a man arrives who means to stay. "Cousin Honoria," he said, and took both my hands, and his were soft and damp. "You must not be alone at a time like this. A woman alone, an estate this size, it is not to be thought of. I have come to help you carry the burden." I was grateful. God help me, that first morning I was grateful. Grief makes you soft in the hands and glad of any shoulder. I gave him the blue room, and I told Mrs. Tranter to lay a 3rd place at dinner, and I thought, well, he is family, and family closes round you when a man is lost. That is what family is for. That was the first of it, and it was small, and there was no witness but me. That is how it starts. Not with the trunk in the rain, with small things in private rooms, where afterward you cannot even say what was done to you, because said aloud each single thing sounds like nothing. At dinner the first night the Colonel's chair had been moved. It stood at the head of the long table, as it always had, the tall carved chair with the worn arms where Rupert sat when he was home. Someone had drawn it back against the wall and set a plain chair at the head, and Crispin was standing behind that plain chair, waiting to sit. I had them shift the old chair, he said, easy as anything. Morbid, don't you think? An empty seat staring at us. Better put away. I said nothing. What was there to say that would not sound mad, that a chair against a wall had struck me like a slap? I sat where he put me, which was to the side. In my own hall, at my own table, I sat to the side. Within the week he had begun what he called the economies. We must retrench, he said. An estate in mourning must draw in. He turned off the old groom, Barrow, who had been at Hollowmere 40 years and had taught my Rupert to sit a horse. 40 years, and a fortnight's wage in his hand and the door. Barrow came to me in the yard, with his cap turning in his fingers, and I could not meet his eye, because I had let it happen, because I had told myself it was not my place to gainsay the man who had come to help. I gave Barrow a sovereign of my own and a letter for a place I knew, and I have never forgiven myself the way I could not look at him. Little things. The good candles put away for tallow, the Sunday joint made smaller. My orders to Mrs. Tranter countermanded, gently, always with a reason, until the servant stopped coming to me at all and went to him. Do you see how it is done? Not one blow you could point to, 100 small subtractions, and at the end of them you look up and you are a guest in your own house, and you cannot say the hour it happened. I did not fight it, I want to be honest with you, because this is a confession as much as a story, and my fault is in it too. I did not fight it because I trusted the law. I thought, I am the Colonel's widow, this is my dower house, the estate is mine or as good as mine, and no man can truly take it, so let the poor grasping creature play at master a while, it costs me nothing but pride, and pride is cheap when you are grieving. I trusted the law to be slow and fair. That trust very nearly cost me everything I had. The second wave came with a witness. Just one. About a month in, Crispin asked me into the library one afternoon, and there was a stranger there, a heavy, careful man in black with a leather folder, who rose and bowed and was named to me as Mr. Absalom Sedge, of Sedge and Marrow, solicitors of the market town. Cousin, said Crispin, and his voice had changed. It had a smoothness on it now, like the top of cold gravy. A thing has come to light, and it is only right you should know of it at once. In going through poor Rupert's desk, the standing desk in the estate office, Mr. Sedge and I have found a will. I said that my husband's will was known. It was with his own lawyers at Wells. It left the estate to me for my life, and after me to the church and the tenants' fund, for we had no children living. That will I had seen. That will I had signed as witness to its codicils myself. A later will, said Sedge, in a dry, apologetic voice, and he drew a paper from his folder. Later than the one at Wells, madam, it would appear the Colonel, in his last illness, thought better of his arrangements. It is dated but 4 months before his death. These late changes of mind are common, I am sorry to say, in a long sickness. He read it to me. I will not give you all of it. The meat of it was this: the whole of Hollowmere, the house and the 400 acres and the water meadows, to Crispin Vane, my cousin, as head of the family and best able to husband it. To me, 31 years the mistress of it, an annuity of £40 a year, and the use of the gatehouse for my life. The gatehouse, where the Pools had lived on my charity, 2 rooms and a scullery and a leaking chimney. I sat very still. I have been told since that I have a stillness that unsettles people, that they cannot read it, and I am glad of it, because inside I was not still at all. £40 a year. And I looked at the paper in Sedge's hand, and here is the thing I want you to hold on to, because everything turns on it in the end. The paper was too white. I had spent a month among my husband's papers, his letters, his accounts, the deeds, the whole memory of a man written down over 30 years. Old paper goes a colour. It ambers, it softens at the folds, and the ink browns, and the whole leaf takes on the look of time. This will, that Sedge held up, said to be 4 months old and found in a dead man's desk. It was white as a fresh-boiled sheet. The ink stood up black and sharp on it. It had never lain a year in any drawer. It had never lain a month. I did not say so. Some caution older than thought put its hand over my mouth. I only said, "May I see the signature?" And Sedge, after a glance at Crispin, held it where I might look but not touch. And there was Rupert's name, a fair copy of it, but my husband's hand at the end shook. The fever had taken the steadiness out of his fingers, and his later letters wandered on the line. This signature was firm as a young man's. Whoever made it had copied an old, strong signature, not the trembling one of his last months. Crispin was watching me. "You will see it is all in order," he said. "Witnessed and signed. A hard thing, cousin, I know. But the Colonel's wishes are the Colonel's wishes, and we are none of us above them." "Witnessed by whom?" I asked. And Sedge, turning the paper to himself, read out 2 names. One I did not know, and one I did. "Thomas Ridd," he read, "of this parish." I said nothing to that either. But I knew Thomas Ridd. Everyone in Nethercleave knew Thomas Ridd. He had been a fisherman's son gone for a sailor, and he had drowned. His ship went down off a foreign coast, and the news had come to the village, and his mother had worn black for him. He had drowned 8 months before the date on that will. A dead man cannot witness a living man's signature. But I did not say it. I folded my hands, and I let them think me beaten, and I carried the 2 things away in my mind, like coals in an apron, the white paper and the drowned witness, and I told not one living soul. That was the second wave, and one man saw it, and it was Sedge, who was paid to see it and say nothing. Then came the public one. That is the one they build such a thing toward. A private cruelty is not enough for a man like Crispin. He wants it witnessed. He wants it made real in front of the world. He wants you unmade where everyone can see, so that afterward the whole village knows its place and yours. He called it a reading of the will. He set it in the great hall, and he sent word down to the tenants that they should attend, as the changes touched them all, and he asked the family, such veins and connections as were within a day's ride, to come and hear. And they came. 22 of them I counted, for I have a head for counting. It comes of years of accounts. Tenants I had nursed, cousins who had eaten at my table, a magistrate's wife, the whole of my world, gathered in my own hall, sitting on chairs set out in rows as if for a lecture, and I brought in and given a chair at the side. At the side again, always at the side now. Sedge read the false will aloud in a droning voice, the whole of it, the house and the land to Crispin, the £40 and the gatehouse to me. I heard a woman gasp when the £40 was named, one of the tenant wives, who knew what I had been to this place. I heard the magistrate's wife murmur. But no one stood. No one said, "This is not right." They sat, and they looked at their hands, the way people do when a wrong is done in the open, and each waits for another to be the one to speak. And then Crispin rose to have his moment. He could not help himself. If he had only kept still, he might have had it all clean. But a small man given a great chair must always make a speech. He said that he was sorry it must be public, but that Hollowmere was a great trust, and the family must see it pass in order. He said that women were not made to hold land, that the Colonel had known it, that even a devoted wife must in the end bow to a husband's better judgment. And then he turned to me, in front of all of them, and he said the words I will carry to my own grave, a colonel's widow signs where she is told, "Cousin, the will is plain." Signs where she is told. 22 people heard it. I have thought since that he did not even mean it as the cruelty it was. That is the worst of it. To him it was only true. To him a woman was a thing that signed where it was told, and I was a woman, and that was the whole of the matter. He told me I must quit Hollowmere by Michaelmas. He said it kindly, as a man does a thing he thinks reasonable. out of the house by Michaelmas into the gatehouse on £40 a year. And do you know what I did in front of all of them? I did not shout. I did not weep, though there were those there who would have thought better of me if I had, who wanted the show of a broken woman so they could pity me and feel it settled. I asked one question. I said, in a voice I kept as level as a still pond, "Mr. Sedge on, what date was this will signed?" There was a little pause. Sedge looked at the paper, and he told me the day and the month and the year. He said it out, plain, before all 22 of them, and by saying it he set his own foot in the trap, though none there knew it but me. Because that was the date I needed. The date after Thomas Ridd was 8 months drowned. I had a small pencil in my reticule, as I always did, for accounts, and while they watched me and thought me stunned, I drew back the cuff of my black sleeve, and I wrote that date on the linen of my cuff, small, where the sleeve would cover it. Then I let my hand fall, and I said, "Thank you," and I sat, and I let them believe they had seen a woman receive her sentence. That was the trunk in the rain too. That same afternoon, after the hall emptied, he had my husband's campaign trunk carried out and set in the drive to be sent to the gatehouse, and it caught the rain, and I lifted the brass corner out of the puddle. The village likes to say, "That was when I broke." The village is wrong. That was when I began. But I want you to understand how close the ground was to going out from under me, because the law that I trusted to be slow and fair was, just then, doing Crispin's work and not mine. He did not stop at the will. A will can be argued. Crispin knew that better than I did, for all his failed clerking, and he moved to make argument pointless. Within the fortnight there was another stranger at Hollowmere, and this one worse than Sedge. A brisk, sandy man named Josiah Kettle, agent of the Marlborough Land Company, and he walked my water meadows with Crispin, the two of them with a rolled paper, pointing and nodding. I watched them from the terrace. Kettle's company drained land. They took low green water meadows like mine, the kind that flood sweet and grow the fat hay, and they cut deep channels and dried them out and grew corn a few hard years until the ground was spent, and then they sold it on. They had offered Crispin £6,000 for Hollowmere entire, £6,000, and the meadows my husband took off his hat to me over would be dead-ditched ground inside a decade. And then the screw. Crispin knew there was a mortgage on the estate. Every estate carries one. My Rupert had borrowed against the land years back to buy the 2 farms up the hill, sound borrowing, and we had paid the interest faithful as Sunday. £2,850 it stood to the Cranleigh Bank. And Crispin, styling himself now master of Hollowmere, went to the Cranleigh Bank, and I do not doubt Kettle's company stood behind him with a whisper, and he had the whole of that mortgage called due. The entire £2,850 to be paid within 60 days, by Lady Day, or the bank would foreclose and take the land, and the sale to Marlborough would go through over the ruin of it. 60 days, £2,850, and what was I? A widow with £40 a year and the use of a leaking gatehouse. It could not be found. That was the point of it. It was never meant to be found. It was the legal knife under the argument. Never mind whose the will is. The bank forecloses, the land sells, and a dead colonel's meadows go under the plough of a company that never so much as smelled the hay. A veteran's estate, 400 acres held through 30 years, and 2 ruined harvests to be dried and killed for £6,000 and a clerk's greed. I sat in the gatehouse, for I had moved to the gatehouse. I had let them think I went meek, and I did my accounts as I have done accounts all my life, and the accounts said I was beaten. £40 a year against 2,850 in 60 days. There is no honest arithmetic that closes that gap. If I had gone on trusting the slow fair law, if I had waited on it another month, the bank would have foreclosed and there would have been nothing for any court to save. And that is the night I remembered the box. It came to me in the dark, the way a thing you have pushed down comes up when you are too tired to hold it under. My husband's grave voice. Swear me something. If ever a Vane comes for Hollowmere, comes with paper, comes with a lawyer, comes to put you off this ground, then you open it, comes with paper, comes with a lawyer, comes to put you off this ground. Every word of it had come true, point for point, as if he had seen the whole of it from his sick-bed. Crispin with his paper, Sedge with his law, Michaelmas, the gatehouse, the trunk in the rain. I did not wait for morning. I took a candle, and I went up the dark drive to the great house, my own house that I now entered like a thief, and I let myself in by the garden door with the key I had never given up, and I climbed to the attic dressing room, past the blue room where Crispin slept, holding my breath at his door. And there behind the field boots was the japanned box where I had left it. He had not found it. It had sat there through all his ransacking of desks and drawers, too plain and small to draw a greedy eye, hidden in the open the way the best things are. I carried it back down and out and along to the gatehouse, and I set it on the scullery table, and I took the little brass key that had hung all these years on my husband's watch chain that I now wore, and I opened it. I broke no oath in opening it. I want that understood. I opened it on the one day he had named. A Vane had come for Hollowmere. Inside, on top, was a letter in his hand, and under the letter, folded and heavy, sealed with a great disc of dark red wax, was a paper. I knew the wax before I read a word. I had watched him press it 100 times. The Vane device stood up sharp in it, the same device that was cut in the brass signet I carried in my apron that very night, for I had kept his seal by me since the day I found it, God knows why, some instinct that would not let it go. I took the signet out and I held it beside the seal on the paper, device to device, and my hands shook so that the candle jumped. The same, his own seal, pressed by his own hand. I read the letter first, because I could not yet bear to touch the wax. Honno, it said, if you are reading this, then I am under the ground you saved for me, and it has fallen out as I feared, and a Vane has come with paper to put you off Hollowmere. I know my cousin. I have known him since he was a boy who would trade a lame calf for a sound one and swear he saw no difference. He will have found a lawyer and made a will and dressed it fair. So hear me. I made one will in my life that is worth the wax on it, and it is this one, sealed here. And no hand is to break this seal but a court of law, mind me, no hand but the courts, or they will say you tampered. I sealed it myself. Amos Pike stood in my gun-room and saw me do it, and set his own name inside as witness, and Amos will remember, for Amos forgets nothing but his own dinner. This will give you Hollowmere entire, house, land, meadows, every rod of it, and revokes all others, any that came before and any that come after, for I know there may come an after in a forger's hand. Take it to the law, Honno. Do not carry it yourself against Crispin in your parlour. Take it to the law, and let the law break the seal. What is sealed honest outlasts what is signed in greed. I am sorry I could not stand between you and this. I have stood between you and worse, and never told you. Hold the ground, Honno. It is yours. It was always going to be yours. Your Rupert. I sat in the gatehouse scullery with my dead husband's voice in my 2 hands, and I wept then, not for the trunk, not for the £40, not for the chair against the wall. I wept because he had known. All those years I thought I stood alone at Hollowmere while he was off with the flag, and all that time he had been watching over me from a distance, thinking ahead of the greedy men, sealing a paper against a day he would not live to see, so that when I was most alone and most beaten, I would climb to an attic and find him there still, holding the line. And when I had done weeping, I dried my face on my sleeve, on the very cuff where the forged date was written in pencil, and I looked at the 2 things together, the false will's date in my own hand on my wrist, and the true will sealed on the table, and I saw the whole shape of it at last. I did not need to break the seal to win. That was the beauty of what he had done. The seal, unbroken, was itself the proof, and the forgery would break itself, on its own faults, if I only had the wit to lay them bare. A dead man for a witness, paper too white to be 4 months old, his name written firm by a hand that in life had shaken. Thomas Ridd. I said the drowned boy's name aloud in the empty scullery. Ridd drowned 8 months before the day Sedge stood up in my great hall and swore the will was signed. It was written in the parish register in Amos Pike's own hand, the burial, or as near a burial as the sea allows, the entry of his death. Crispin, in his arrogance, had let his tame lawyer put a dead man's name to a forged paper, and never thought a colonel's widow would know the date a fisherman's son had drowned. But I knew, in a village you know, and the register would say it in black and white for any judge to read. I did not sleep. I sat up the whole of that night with the box open before me, and I did what I have always done when the world came at me. I made a plan, and I wrote it out in a fair hand, step by step, as I would write out a year's cropping. I would not confront him. That was the first rule, and it was Rupert's rule from the letter, no hand but the court's. Let Crispin believe me broken. Let him believe I had gone meek to the gatehouse to eat my £40 and die quiet. The longer he believed it, the deeper his own foot went in. I would take the sealed will, still sealed, to old Amos Pike, who had seen it made, and would swear to it, and I would keep it in the church, in the vestry, under God's roof and out of Crispin's reach, and I would find a lawyer, not a village one, not one Crispin could reach or buy, but an honest man far off, whom I would instruct by post from the market town where no one at Hollowmere would see me do it, and that lawyer would file a caveat against the probate of the false will, so that Crispin could not make his forgery good at law before I was ready. And then I would gather my proofs, the register for Ridd, the maker's mark on that too white paper, and I would wait. The bank's clock was ticking toward Lady Day. Kettle's men were already driving their stakes in the water meadows, marking where the draining channels would go. Somewhere in the great house Crispin was sleeping in a bought bed, dreaming of £6,000. He thought he had taken the land my husband died holding. He thought a soldier's widow had no weapon in the world. He did not know I had spent the night with the colonel. I closed the box over the letter. But the sealed will I wrapped in a clean linen, and I put it inside my black bodice against my heart, where no hand would come at it unasked. The seal must be broken, my husband had written, by no hand but the court's. I meant to see to it that it was. In the morning, before the frost was off the grass, I would put on my bonnet and my widow's cloak, and I would walk the mile to the church, to Amos Pike, with the dead colonel's true will beating against my ribs, and I would begin, quietly, in a way not one of them would see coming, to take my Hollowmere back. But first I had to get out of the gatehouse and past the great house unseen, and as I sat there in the last of the candle I heard, up the drive, a door, and then boots on the gravel in the dark. Someone was awake at Hollowmere in the black before dawn. Someone was coming down the drive toward the gatehouse, and the sealed will was against my heart, and the box lay open on the table in plain sight, and the boots were coming on. The boots came on. I did not move. I let the candle die of its own accord, so no light showed under the door, and I took the box off the table and set it in the empty grate, behind the fire irons, where a man in a hurry would not think to look. Then I sat with my hands in my lap, and I waited. The steps stopped outside. A fist came against the door. I did not answer it at once. A widow woken before dawn is a slow thing, and I meant to be exactly the slow, beaten thing he thought me. I lit the candle again, as if I had only then risen. I opened the door with my shawl clutched to my throat. It was Crispin. He had a lantern, and his face above it was the colour of tallow. He had not slept. I saw that. Some worm was in him already, some small unease he could not name, and it had walked him down the drive in the dark to look at the woman he had robbed. "You are up," he said. "I am old," I said. The old wake early. He looked past me into the one room. His eyes went along the shelf, along the table, along the cold grate, where the box sat hidden behind the iron. They found nothing. I watched him find nothing, and I kept my face as plain as a plate. I could not sleep, he said, and it came out of him half a complaint, as if his sleeplessness were also a thing I owed him. I got to thinking of Rupert's papers. He was a hoarding man. He kept everything. Letters, orders, deeds. There will be papers of his somewhere in that house, and I mean to have them all before the lawyers come. He burned a great deal at the end, I said. This was true. He had burned a great deal. He had not burned the box. Did he? Crispin's eyes came back to me. You would tell me, Honoria, if there were papers. What have I to do with papers now? I said. You have taken the desk they lived in. That satisfied him, because it was the kind of thing a broken woman says, and a broken woman was what he needed me to be. He grunted. He held the lantern up once more, a last look, and then he turned and went back up the drive in the grey, and I stood in the door and watched the light of him go, and my heart went hard and quiet in my chest, under the linen, against the sealed wax. He had come to find the box. He did not know it was a box he wanted. He only knew he was afraid, and did not know of what. That was the first sweet thing I had felt in 3 weeks. A guilty man is afraid before he knows his crime is found. I had that fear now to work with. I meant to use it gently, and to the last drop. I did not walk to the church that morning. It was too near. He was watching now, sleepless and suspicious, and a widow slipping to the rectory in the frost would set him barking. So I did the harder thing. I waited. I let 2 days go by, and I was quiet and small and grateful, and on the market day, when the whole house knew I went to the town for my £40 worth of thread and tallow, I went, and I did not come straight home. Mr. Fenwick I had never met. He was a barrister at Taunton, a careful cold man recommended to me by no one at Hollowmere, found only in an old letter of my husband's, a name Rupert had once trusted in a matter of a tenant's lease. I wrote to him first, and then I went to him, and I laid the whole of it on his table, not the will that never left my breast, but the shape of the thing, the forged paper too white. The witness Thomas Ridd drowned off the Newfoundland banks 8 months before the day Sedge swore he had signed. And, last, that I held the Colonel's own true will, sealed, and that the rector of Nethercleave had seen it sealed. Fenwick listened with his fingers together. He asked me only 3 questions, and each was sharper than the last, and when I had answered them, he said a thing I have kept. Madam, a forger's worst enemy is a patient woman. Do nothing to your cousin. Smile at him. Let him spend. Every stake that land company drives into your meadows is another yard of rope. We will file a caveat this week, so that he cannot prove his paper at law until we have had our say, and then we wait for his hearing, and we let him bring his lie into a courtroom where I can reach it. The caveat. That was my deed, done not with a shout but with a clerk's pen and a shilling stamp, in a cold office at Taunton on a Tuesday. When I walked out of Fenwick's door the thing was in motion, and no man at Hollowmere had heard so much as a whisper of it. The seal must be broken, my husband had written, by no hand but the court's. I had found the court. Now I had only to lead Crispin to it and let him break the seal upon himself. So began the strangest weeks of my life. I went home, and I was beaten, and I was grateful, and I dined at the foot of my own table, while Crispin sat in my husband's chair and carved my husband's mutton and spoke of drains. I will tell you it was not easy to smile at him. There is a kind of lying that costs the liar, and this was that kind. He would say, over the wine you'll be snug in the gatehouse, Honoria, snugger than a great cold house. This place ate money, you know it did. And I would say, it did, Crispin. It ate a deal of money, and I would think of the 2 bad harvests I had carried it through on my own hands, while he clerked in some dim London office and let his own creditors grow fat. He asked me once, all kindness, whether the gatehouse chimney drew, or whether he ought to send a man to see to it before the cold. I told him it drew ill in an east wind. He said he would send the man. He never did, but I had said it as gently as if I were grateful, and I saw him ease, saw him settle into the belief that the old woman was tamed, and I hated the smile on my own face, and I kept it there. That was the first cycle, and its whole purpose was his comfort. A comfortable enemy is a careless one. The second cycle was near a disaster, and I have the cold sweat of it still. He searched the attic. I had known he would. In the end, he had told me so himself, with his lantern at my door. One afternoon, while I was thought to be at the gatehouse, he had 2 of the men up under the roof, and he went through the trunks and the hat boxes and the old campaign chests, throwing my husband's soldiering life across the boards, looking for the papers of a hoarding man. Mrs. Tranter, who was still mine in her heart, though she took his orders now, sent the boot boy running down to warn me, but the box was not there. That was the whole of my safety. I had already carried it, wrapped in a market basket under a cloth of eggs, to Amos Pike, and it sat now in the locked vestry cupboard at Nethercleave, under the parish plate, where no Vane would ever think to look. And more, I had left something for Crispin to find, an old estate ledger, a fat dead thing full of nothing but wheat prices and farrier's bills from 20 years gone. I had set plainly in the japanned box's old place, behind the field boots, where a searching man's hand would fall on it first. He found it. He carried it down. I heard, that evening, from Mrs. Tranter, how he had sat an hour over it by the fire, turning the pages, hunting for the thing that frightened him, and finding only oats and horseshoes, and how at last he had thrown it down and said, "There is nothing." The man kept nothing that signifies. And he was easy again. He thought he had searched the house and beaten it. A man who believes he has already looked will not look twice. I had spent his suspicion for him, and bought myself the rest of my silence with an old book of horseshoe bills. The third cycle was the quiet gathering of my proof, and it was the coldest work, because it was done among the dead. I went to Amos Pike, and together, by candlelight in his vestry, we opened the parish register. Not our own, but the one from the coast parish where the Ridds belonged, which Pike sent for on a churchman's word from a churchman's friend. And there it was, in a strange clerk's hand, Thomas Ridd, of this parish, mariner, lost with the schooner Providence off the banks, and the date. 8 months, near 9, before the day Absalom Sedge had stood in my hall and sworn that same Thomas Ridd had set his living hand to Crispin's will. A dead man cannot sign. A drowned man cannot witness. I copied the entry, and Pike set his name to my copy as a true transcription, and I carried it home against my heart beside the will. And I got the paper's secret too, the 2 white paper. There was a mark in the corner of Crispin's will, a little blind stamp of the stationer, a wheat sheaf and 2 letters that I had seen when Sedge held the sheet to the window. I did not know it, but Fenwick's clerk did the knowing. He wrote to the maker, a mill at Wells, and the mill answered, plain as milk, that the wheat sheaf mark was of a batch first milled and sold in a year I need not name to you, save that it was 2 full years after my husband lay in his grave. The colonel had been 2 years dead when the paper his will was written on was first made. Rupert Vane had signed a sheet that did not exist while he lived. That was the second nail, and it was the one that could not be pulled. I had my proofs now. The dead witness. The unborn paper, the true will, sealed, and I had, pressed in soft wax by my own thumb from my husband's brass signet. The little cool seal that had lived in my apron pocket all these weeks. A clean, fresh impression of the Vane device, the mailed hand and the motto, ready to lay against the seal on the true will, so that any judge might see the 2 were struck from one iron. I sent that wax to Fenwick folded in wool. Everything was ready. And the mortgage clock ran on toward Lady Day, and Kettle's stakes stood white in my meadows, and Crispin spent against a fortune he did not yet own, and none of them knew that the ground had gone hollow under all three of them at once. Then Crispin heard of the caveat, and the whole game turned to fire. I do not know who told him. A clerk's loose tongue at Taunton, perhaps, or the bank, made nervous. But he came down the drive again, and this time there was no lantern and no tallow fear on him. There was rage. He had my caveat in his fist, a lawyer's copy of it, and he shook it in my face in the gatehouse door, and I saw at last the man under the kindness. "You," he said, "you have set a lawyer on me. You, where does a 40-pound widow find a barrister at Taunton? What are you at, Honoria? What papers have you got?" And here I made the one mistake I nearly could not mend. I was too calm. He saw my calm, and it told him more than any weeping would have. His eyes went narrow. "You have got something," he said. "Lo, by God, you have got something of Rupert's." So he moved fast, as a frightened forger will. He went to Sedge, and he paid him, I learned this after, at the trial, from Sedge's own broken mouth, he paid him to swear before the court that my will, whatever I produced, was a thing got up by a grieving woman with a candle and a stick of wax, a widow's forgery to spite an honest heir, and he had Kettle lien on the Cranley Bank, and the bank agreed to press the foreclosure on the very morning of the probate, so that even should my paper stand, the land would be sold out from under it for the mortgage debt before the ink of the verdict dried. And he had the hearing moved forward, close, to beat me before Fenwick was ready. For one night I thought he had won. I sat in the gatehouse and I thought, I have been too slow. Rupert warned me the law was slow, and I trusted its slowness. And now the fast dishonest thing will outrun the slow honest one, and they will call my husband's own true will lie in open court, and I will have nothing. Not even his good name. I did not sleep. I held the will against me, and I felt the wax edge of the seal through the linen, and I said his name in the dark. And in the morning I put on my black, and my widow's cloak, and I took the mile to the church, and then the road to Nethercleave, to the assize, to the courtroom, with the sealed will beating against my ribs. Because there was nothing left now but to walk in and set it on the bench, and let it live or die before men's eyes. The courtroom at Nethercleave was full. It is a small place, and the whole 100 had come, for a great house does not fall every year, and the tenants I had fed through 2 hard winters were packed along the back wall, and the family, such as it was, sat forward. And there in his good black coat was Crispin, and beside him Absalom Sedge with his leather folder, and behind them, cool as brass, Josiah Kettle of the Marlborough Land Company, come to see his £6,000 worth of drained meadow made safe at law. Sedge stood first. He read Crispin's will aloud, the 2-white will, in his oiled voice, and he told the court how it had been lately, and honestly found in the Colonel's own desk, witnessed and plain, leaving the estate to the cousin and £40 to the widow. And then he turned, and he looked at me, where I sat by Fenwick, and he said the thing they had brought him to say. "My lord, we are given to understand the widow will produce a paper of her own. A will, she will call it, sealed, my lord. I must tell the court plainly what this is. It is the work of grief. It is a thing got up since the Colonel's death by a woman who cannot bear her portion, sealed with an old signet any hand might press, dated to suit, and offered here to overthrow a true testament. I ask the court to give it no more weight than a child's drawing. The Colonel signed one will. This one." And he laid his hand upon the white paper as a man lays his hand upon a Bible. I felt the whole room turn to look at me. I felt the tenant's pity, and Crispin's hard triumph, and the judge's tired doubt. This was the valley. This was the moment they had built to break me, and to a stranger's eye it was well built. Then Fenwick rose. He did not raise his voice. He was a cold man, and he stayed cold, and that was worth more that morning than any thunder. "My lord," he said, "my learned friend is troubled that a seal may be pressed by any hand. Let us then not trust the widow's hand, nor mine, nor his. Let us trust the courts. I ask that the sealed paper be given to the court unopened, and that the court itself break the seal, so that no man in this room may say a Vane or a Vane's lawyer had it opened first. The judge liked that. I saw him like it. Let it be brought, he said. And I stood, and I put my hand into my black bodice before them all, and I drew out the linen, and I unwound it. And there in my 2 hands lay my husband's will, whole, sealed, the dark red wax unbroken, the mailed hand of the Vane device stamped deep in it. I did not carry it to the bench. Fenwick would not let me. The usher carried it and laid it before the judge, and the whole room leaned. There is a second thing, said Fenwick, sent to me and to no one else, under separate cover, and he gave the clerk the little folded wool, and in it the fresh wax impression I had struck with my own thumb weeks before, the same device, from the same iron. That the court may compare. 2 seals, my lord, one on the will, one struck plainly before witnesses at Taunton and never near this paper. Let the court say if they are one hand's work or 2. The judge took up the signet impression. He took up the will. He held them together up to the tall window's light, and the whole room held its breath, and I heard, somewhere in it, Crispin's chair creak as he came forward on it. The device is the same, the judge said. Mailed hand. The motto beneath, struck from one seal. Then he gave the will to the clerk, and he said, break it. The clerk broke my husband's wax before the bench. I heard it go. It is a small, dry sound, a seal breaking, and I have heard it in my sleep 100 nights since, and it is not a sad sound to me. It is the sound of the court's hand where his had wished it, and no other. The clerk opened the sheet, and he read it out into that silence, and I will give it to you as near as I have it by heart. The last will of Rupert George Vane, Colonel, of Hollowmere in the parish of Nethercleave, made in his own hand and sealed with his own seal, revoking all wills before it, and all wills that might be shown after it, of what date soever. To my wife Honoria Vane, Hollowmere and every acre and every water meadow and every stick and stone thereof, entire and for her life, and to her name after, that she may lie at last in the ground I mean to be buried in. And a line at the foot, witnessed this day by Amos Pike, clerk in holy orders, and the date, years old, honest old paper, gone soft brown at the fold. I did not weep then either. I had not wept when they set his trunk in the rain, and I did not weep now. But I put my hand flat on the rail before me, and I felt the old wood, my husband's wood, and something in my chest that had been iron for 3 weeks, went quietly to water and did not spill. Amos Pike stood in his place and told the court, plain and old and true, how he had watched the colonel write that will and drip that wax and press that seal, years before he died, in the gun-room at Hollowmere with the dogs at the fire, and how the colonel had said to him, closing it, "There, Amos, if ever a Vane comes for Honno with paper, this is the paper that stands." That should have been enough. But Fenwick was a thorough man, and he did not mean Crispin merely to lose. He meant him ruined past rising, and so he named the floor, and the naming was the last cold pleasure of that day. He took up Crispin's white will again. He laid beside it the copy Amos Pike and I had made of the Coast Parishes Register. My lord, this will offered by the cousin is witnessed. It bears one witness's name, Thomas Ridd. He let it sit. Thomas Ridd, mariner of this coast. My lord, Thomas Ridd was drowned with the schooner Providence off the Newfoundland banks, and he read the date, 8 months and more, before the day the cousin's own solicitor has this morning sworn the colonel signed. The court will observe that a drowned man makes a poor witness. He cannot have watched a signing that fell most of a year after the sea had him. The room made a sound then, a long, low sound, and I saw Sedge's face go the colour of his own paper. And that we may not think it a slip of a date, Fenwick went on, gentle as a man turning a screw, let the court consider the paper itself. And he told them of the wheatsheaf mark, and of the mill at Wells, and of the year, 2 years after the kernel lay in the earth, that the sheet was first made. The dead cannot witness, and the dead cannot write on paper the living have not yet made. This will, and he set it down as a man sets down something spoiled, was made by a hand that had neither a true witness nor a true sheet to write upon. It is a forgery, my lord, root and branch, and I say so. And then, only then, I spoke. I had not meant to. Fenwick had told me to sit silent and let the law do its work, and the law had done it. But Crispin had turned in his seat to look at me, not in rage now, but white, gone loose in the face, a man watching the floor open, and I found I had a thing to say to him, and I said it across that whole quiet room, without any heat at all, in the voice I would use to tell a servant the fire wanted coal. My husband signed one will in his life, I said. He sealed it with his own hand. You have been holding the other. He said nothing. There was nothing in the world for him to say. The judge did the rest in the dry words of the law, but the words meant this. The white will was void, and worse than void, a fraud upon the court. The true will stood. Hollowmere and every acre was mine, entire, as my husband had sealed it years before any of them came grasping. And the court, seeing what it had seen, did not let the 2 men walk out into the ordinary day. It held them. I will give you their falls one at a time, for each earned his own, and I have thought it right to remember them separately. Crispin first. He was taken up that same week on the 2 charges the paper had earned him, forging a will and uttering it as true, which is to say bringing a lie into court and swearing by it. His counsel had one thing to offer, that he had been himself deceived, that Sedge had found the paper and he had trusted it, and for a day it looked as if he might crawl out under that. But a man's debts do not wait on his acquittal. The creditors he had fed against his £6,000 heard, all in the same week, that there would be no £6,000 and no Hollowmere, and they came down on him together like crows on a dropped loaf. The London men he had clerked among would not know him. Kettle's company, that had been ready to make him rich, would not so much as answer his letters now. He left the county before the leaves turned, on a hired horse, with less than he had come with, and the water meadows he had meant to gut and drain for gold lay green behind him, and were never his to sell. I heard he tried a while at some port town to raise money on his name, and found the name would not raise a shilling. He had wanted the land my husband died holding. He could not forge the man who held it, and without the man the land would not come. Then Sedge. His was the plainest fall, and the one that satisfied the law most, for a solicitor is an officer of the court, and the court does not forgive a bought oath. He had stood in that room and sworn a drowned man had signed a sheet not yet milled, and when Fenwick laid the register and the mill's letter side by side, his own oath hanged him. He was struck from the rolls, put off the list of men allowed to practice the law at all, for perjury, and the firm of Sedge and Marrow, that had let its name to Crispin's paper for a cut of a fortune, put up its shutters within the month, and did not open them again. Marrow, they said, had never known. It did not matter. The name was poison, and the door stayed shut. Sedge did not go to the assizes in irons, which some thought soft, but a lawyer forbidden the law, with a perjury against his name that every clerk in the county knew, is a dead man walking about, and he knew it, and that was enough for me. I did not need him broken on a wheel. I needed him nothing, and nothing is what they made him. And last the company, Josiah Kettle and his Marlborough Land Company, that had waited so cool at the back of the court to see its bargain made safe. When the true will stood, there was no bargain. Crispin had never owned an acre to sell. The £6,000 went back in the company's box unspent, and Kettle folded his map of drains and stood up and walked out of Nethercleave without a word to me, as a man leaves a shop that has nothing he wants. That would have been well enough. But there was a sweeter turn, and it was Rupert's doing, not mine. For when the estate came to me entire, So did the Colonel's arrears. The pension a grateful country had been slow to pay a soldier of 30 years, and had been slower still to pay his widow, and which I had gone without and never done for. Fenwick unlocked it. The Crown paid what it owed at last, into my hand, and it was very near the sum of the mortgage, the £2,850 owing to the Cranleigh Bank, that had been the whip over my neck, the 60-day sword, the thing that was to sell my meadows before Lady Day. I paid it. I paid it before Lady Day, with my husband's own withheld wages, and the bank took its money and let go its grip, and the meadows stood safe and green and undrained, and Kettle's white stakes I had the men pull up and burn. So the ground my husband meant to be buried in stayed the ground my husband was buried in, on the rise above the water meadows, and no company's channel came near him, and no cousin's plough. And that is the end of the taking. But it is not quite the end of the telling, for the best of it came a year on, in the quiet, and I would have you see it before I let you go. It is a June morning at Hollowmere as I tell you this. The water meadows are down there, uncut, standing in green and moving in the wind the way the sea moves, the way I suppose the sea moved over Thomas Ridd, poor soul, who never signed anything and was made a liar of by dead men's greed. I have had a stone set right for him in his own parish, which was a small thing to do, and the only apology I could make a drowned man. The Colonel's chair is back at the head of my table, where a cousin sat in it one winter, and it will not be moved again while I breathe. And here at my throat, on a bit of ribbon, is his brass signet, the little cool seal that lived in my apron all through that black season and struck the wax the judge held to the light. I wear it where a woman wears the thing she will be buried in. Amos Pike takes his coffee with me on the porch of a morning now, being old and glad of the walk and the warmth, and we do not say much, being old friends and past the need of it. On the table between us sits the japanned box, empty now. There is nothing in it but the letter. If Crispin comes with paper, Hono, remember I sealed mine myself, and Amos Pike saw me do it. I keep it there. I read it when the light is low. A man dead 4 years reached out of the ground and took the house back for me with his own sealed hand. And there is no comfort in this world quite like being so loved as that, so far ahead of the harm. A letter came from Crispin in the spring. I knew the hand. It was begging and excusing, both at once, the way a small man begs, half sorry and half still sure the world had used him ill. I did not read it. I will tell you what I did with it, and you may think me hard if you like. I put it on the fire, whole, folded as it came, and I watched it take. And I was not angry as it burned, and I was not glad. I only thought that I had spent too much of one hard winter reading the papers of grasping men, and I would spend no more of my peace on this one. I let it go up the ill-drawing chimney he never sent a man to mend, and I went back out to my coffee and my old rector and my green meadows. He wanted the land my husband died holding. He could not forge the man who held it. That is the whole of it, and it is the only justice I ever needed. What a man signs in greed lasts as long as the lie holds, and not 1 hour longer. What is sealed honestly waits in the dark, in a japanned box, behind the field boots, for years if it must, and keeps. It keeps, if ever you have been the quiet one at the foot of your own table, watched over by people who thought you had no weapon in the world. Sit tight and be patient, and mind where the true seal lies. And if this reached you where you are, tell me the name of your town below, so I know what far country the Colonel's widow found a friend in tonight.